Tuesday for the next month or so. I've been doing it for about a little over a month now. Every Tuesday, we talk about two nominees for the Steelers Hall of Honor that will be inducted in this year's class. We generally have a maximum of 4. Last year was 5, but usually 4. And these are names that have been nominated from members of Steelers Nation Unite. You can join up, by the way, SteelersNationUnite.com. Doesn't cost anything, but, you get all kinds of notifications and stuff and opportunities to participate in things like this. And the players that are nominated are included on a big list. I still have last year's. When the committee, of which I'm a member, we begin deliberations. So we have a couple or 3 every week. This week, let's start going back a little old school. Ray Mathews. Last year, we inducted Buddy Dial, played in the 50s and 60s. Ray Mathews was a 7th-round draft choice out of Clemson by the Steelers in 1951, but he's a local guy, played at McKeesport High School. How about that? I did not know that about him. He was a halfback, but in those days, there was no such thing as a tight end. So one of the halfbacks was generally considered a flanker. He was more of a receiver than he was a running back, and that's what Ray Mathews was for a good portion of his career. He had a number of terrific seasons. He was a Pro Bowl player twice in 1952 and 1955. And again, they list him as a left halfback, again, a flanker. Then things changed, the RE, right end, 1957. So, he played some with Bobby Lane, and there weren't great Steeler teams back then, but he excelled. And I don't have the numbers as to whether he led the team, but, he averaged about 5 to 6 touchdown catches a year, which in those days was big. I didn't throw the ball that often. By the way, I don't know if you've ever seen old film of those games. The football itself was almost the size of a basketball. It wasn't, but it was like a rugby ball. It was a lot fatter. And I would imagine not as streamlined, harder to throw. And they didn't throw the ball all that much back then. But Ray Mathews was one of the premier receivers in the NFL. Caught 34 touchdown passes in his career. Again, he played with the Steelers as a number 7 choice out of Clemson from 51 through 59. Then in 1960, he played for the fledgling Dallas Cowboys. That was the Cowboys' expansion year. They added them. There were 13 teams in the league at that time. And what they did, every team played Dallas, because you only played 12 games back then. Every team in the league, remember there were only 12 teams in the league back then, played the Cowboys once. Then they added the Vikings in 61, got an even number, and that changed things a little bit. But that's how they had the Dallas Cowboys play, who as an expansion team, even with Tom Landry there, were terrible. Eddie LeBaron, as I remember, was the quarterback. 5'7". 5'7", you can't even be the holder now at 5'7". Unless you're Darren Sproles. So Ray Mathews was a tremendous player back in that era, 2-time Pro Bowler, and he is certainly under consideration for the Steelers Hall of Honor. The other fellow we're going to talk about today is probably more in your sights, although if you're 40 years old, maybe you don't remember this guy either. That would be J.T. Thomas. J.T. Thomas, a number 1 pick out of Florida State, became a starting corner for the Steelers opposite Mel Blount. And I know, let's remember who he was playing with. And JT be the first to tell you. You got Mel Blount on one corner, Mike Wagner, Donnie Shell, the 3 unbelievable linebackers. Andy Russell was still there. Although when he was a first-round pick, Lambert wasn't there yet, right? Came in 74. But JT fit the mold of the way Chuck Noll wanted to play. A good cover guy, but he's also very physical. At good size, it wasn't Mel Blount, But, I mean, there aren't many cornerbacks 6'4". I mean, Mel who was on with us, 2 weeks ago, was kind of a freak. But J.T. Thomas, the thing about J.T., he was a really solid tackler. I mean, I remember watching him play. He rarely missed a tackle. It's one of the things about those Steeler teams. And I think that that's gone downhill in the entire NFL these days. That team could tackle. Jack Ham might have been the best tackler in the NFL. We're not talking about Jack. He's already in the Hall of Honor and, of course, the Hall of Fame. But Woody Woodenhofer said he was as close to being perfect week after week as any player who ever played for the Steelers. And one of the things that Jack did so well, he was just a fantastic tackler. Form tackle. You know, back in those days, they didn't headhunt. Their job was to get the guy on the ground. And I remember Jack, form tackle. Head up, shoulder to the midsection, take the guy down. JT was that same way. And playing corner is not an easy job. Pass coverage, but you've also got to play run support. And he was great at that. Not only was he a good football player, he was a great guy. Didn't know Mr. Mathews. But JT was just one of those guys. He fit in beautifully. He was bright. And to give you an idea, like they said, you move on to your life's work. JT got involved in the restaurant business. And he owns, I think he sold his interest now, but he owns several local chain restaurants. I want to say it was Denny's. It might not have been. I probably shouldn't say anything. But he was very successful in the restaurant business, owned about 6 or 7 of them, and may have sold his interest. But he was, again, we talked about Mike Wagner. How do you get attention if you're playing with all those Hall of Fame guys on defense who are in Canton? It's hard. And, of course, then JT was eventually replaced when they drafted Ron Johnson. Came in and took his place, and eventually others followed. But for those Super Bowl years, J.T. Thomas was an integral part, even though if people didn't shout out his name. He was a very good player and an integral part of those great defense of the 70s. Those are just 2 of the names for the Hall of Honor. We'll do this every week for the next month or so. And we're not talking about everybody. That's all we do for every show. But the ones we do talk about are certainly worthy of induction.